swag. But down in the underground, we'll find someone true. Down in the underground, a land serene, a crystal moon.
Welcome back, my friends, to this episode number 9 of the Intermediary Diaries, where I, Artemaeus, your host, will be talking about the dream state and why that state may be more open to paranormal experiences, and then my own personal experience with what I found to be an Egyptian god in one of these dream states. I'd like to begin by giving a little bit of scientific background, perhaps, on dream states to help relate this to why I think we get more experiences with the paranormal in that particular state. What I understand about the brain is that we have what's called the default mode network, which operates as sort of an autopilot, like a guided program for us day to day, that as we get older tends to narrow our focus more and more and more. Think about like blinders or bumpers, essentially. And I know up to this point in my life, at least before I met Tillie, I was pretty narrowly focused, and my default mode network was very strong. But when we go into the different brainwave states from, let's just say, alpha, beta to delta, or theta and delta, and not in any particular order, we're usually in beta brainwave states throughout the day, and then as we go to sleep, we cycle through theta and then delta, which would be deep sleep, from what I understand. In those different brainwave states, the default mode network is no longer quite as active, and some people also relate the default mode network to our egos, so the story that we tell ourselves of who we are and conducts our behavior day to day. It's designed largely, supposedly, to keep us safe from our experience. We learn, if this thing didn't kill me or if this thing helped me, then I will keep doing these things. And thus the default mode network becomes a relatively rigid structure if you don't keep yourself open to alternatives or different types of thought. And again, in sleep, this default mode network sort of goes offline. And the same thing actually happens when people take psychedelics, for example. So when we talked about ayahuasca in another episode, I discussed a little bit of it then. So there are alternative ways to get around that default mode network. Anyway, I have noticed in my life that a lot of my paranormal experiences happen when I'm in the theta brainwave state, which is what is described as the twilight. So not quite totally asleep and yet not quite fully awake. And a lot of my dreams seem to happen there as well. Perhaps they happen in the delta and REM sleep, I'm not really sure. I haven't hooked up my brain, I don't know. However, I know that I'm not in that beta brainwave state, the fully awake, the fully default mode network activation. And I think in those times then, that is when our egos are down and the paranormal experiences have more of a chance of reaching our consciousness, you might say. Notice too, something else to keep in mind. Dreams, from what I understand, have a couple of different themes. They can either be the theme of this is a dream that's just my brain vomiting whatever I've experienced through the day or some childhood trauma or garbage that it's trying to work through. And I don't always remember those dreams when I wake up. I know right after I've woken up that I've had them, but they tend to fade over time. The dreams that may be paranormal experiences, or what I believe I'm plugging into another realm or another reality, are dreams that I remember very distinctly, enough to tell the story over and over again as time goes on. And this is one of those dreams. And in this dream, I'm walking along a street side where there are shops, bordering the street. And I casually look into one of these shops, and it looks like, if you guys have ever seen the movie The Gremlins, where there's this little Asian little old Asian man who's doddering around the shop, and he's got all kinds of, really interesting, strange looking trinkets everywhere, and it's dimly lit and very mysterious. And I think, well, that's pretty interesting. I'm just going to walk in. No harm could come from walking into a shop that looks like that. So I walk in, and the little old man is in the back of the shop, and there's people milling about. And he finds me right away, and he goes, "Oh, what you need is over there." And I'm not aware that I'm looking for anything in particular. He seems to know me. And I look in the direction of where he's pointing, and I can't really see anything. And he says, no, behind the wall. Look back there. And sure enough, there is what seems to be a false wall that blends in pretty seamlessly with the rest of the shop. But behind this wall, there's a staircase that goes all the way down. Also, something to note in these dream states, usually I have been stripped of my typical, anxiety or overthinking brain. And maybe some people would be alarmed by, oh, there's somebody that I've never met who says, yeah, I know you, go down these stairs in this very weird shop. There's, nothing alarming about that. But in this state, I'm perfectly calm, and I'm just following instructions without any concern. So I go down these steps, down, and it opens up at the bottom of these steps to a massive theater, and there's a film playing on the screen, and it's priests and priestesses from Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian culture, I'm assuming, at least that's what it looks like, with Egyptian gods on the screen speaking to these priests and priestesses. I don't understand anything that's on the screen. I just sit at the back of the theater and continue to watch. And one of the gods on the screen, as it's speaking, turns to look directly at the audience. And what I learned was that it was looking at me, and then proceeded to walk through the screen, down the aisle, back towards me. And this is the crocodile god. So we're not talking about, maybe Anubis or Horus or Isis or, any of the gods or goddesses that might look a little less threatening. No, this is a full-on crocodile, mouthful of teeth, walking just left the screen to walk down the aisle towards me. And I'm still not alarmed by this at all. I think, oh, I'm just going to have a conversation. This person just wants to talk to me. When he finally got up closer to me, I noticed that his features looked what I can only describe as hyper real, which, I know what a live crocodile looks like. They look like they could use some skincare pretty seriously, but this guy was just pristine. He still had, the skin of a crocodile, but it was perfect. It was smooth, but not too smooth. It had color that was deep and rich, that almost like high definition, basically, which I know in real life, we do not have that in our normal experience with anything, much less with animals or crocodiles. And when he spoke to me, it was like a badly dubbed movie. If any of you guys have ever watched foreign films where, the mouths are moving and, you can hear that it's the language that you need to hear, but it is not the language that the actors or the actresses are speaking. And as he's speaking, the mouth is moving, the tongue is moving, and unlike a crocodile, which has skin that's very fixed, there was a little bit of movement around the teeth, what I would assume to be the lips, moving, articulating while he's speaking to me. But again, badly dubbed movie, so it wasn't syncing up properly, and certainly if that were in real life and, I would be listening to it, would not be pronouncing the words very well at all. That translation would not be the same. But, in this dream state, maybe it was just for, entertainment purposes, or to help kind of smooth the interaction over a little bit with me even further. As if speaking to something with a crocodile head wasn't alarming enough in the first place, why he decided to add some of these other features doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe just for fun, I don't know. But it was all very unusual in that way, now that I'm looking back on it. And some of the regalia and the things that he was wearing weren't typical in the depictions of Sobek, as I went and looked at later on. The one image that I looked up of Sobek had a very particular headdress that had what looks like, I don't know, two feathers or something, and then these curly, almost like horns. But in this depiction, in this presentation that I saw, he was wearing more of that death mask headdress like King Tut's sarcophagus has, where it's that kind of half crescent shape with the the bars going all across it, and a full length lightish color robe, not full white, but maybe like an off-white natural color, which is also something that when Sobek is depicted is usually not typical. Sobek usually wears something that's more knee length, but this was full, like you would see the priests or priestesses, very regal, and dare I say handsome. This was a very handsome individual with that hyper realistic high definition color and texture and everything else, just a very awe-inspiring presence for me. And just to casually speak to me like somebody on the bus or in line at the grocery store, like it was nothing. Interesting experience, to say the least, and dare I say pleasant, actually. A little bit of a relief as compared to a day-to-day interaction with any other human being whose motives you don't know for them just interacting with you. Kind of sad in that way, but interesting to note. Did I say interesting? Very interesting. And this God begins to deliver a message to me that's not for me. It's actually for Tillie. And proceeds to tell me that I should relay this message to Tillie, that she's doing just fine, even though she's feeling a little lost and struggling, that she will figure out what it is that she's supposed to do. Everything's going to be just fine, not to worry about it. So, pretty positive message in general. And this toothy crocodile is, telling me all of this. And so I wake up and I tell Tillie. And she was a little surprised, to say the least, at least in the fact that I was able to deliver something to her that generally is something that she's giving to other people, able to communicate with these non-human peoples, other entities, beings, whatever you want to call them, and that's something that was accurate for her. Information that I couldn't have known to give her, as she told me later, that she was considering what to do with her direction in life. She had started this channel, The Weird Walk Home, and didn't feel like she was getting the sort of reach and the sort of effect that she really wanted, which was to be able to help people. It just wasn't working. And in fact, in a lot of cases, people were giving her a lot of blowback, a lot of pushback for what she was trying to do. And I, over the last nearly 10 years that I've been together with her, have had to do a lot of work. If you've been following this series at all, you'll know that from the very beginning, I was full of ego. That default mode network had me pretty much locked into the Dunning-Kruger effect, thinking that, I knew what I was supposed to know and I was doing just fine, thank you very much. And throughout the course of all this work, the paranormal experiences, and then, the inner work that I've been doing, maybe, slowly but surely, I am being more amenable to communication to these other beings. And it's interesting to me that, number one, it does happen in the dream state still. I don't get, out in my normal waking life, for the most part, paranormal experiences, because I think I'm still got some work to do in that way. Firmly, foot planted in some sort of reality, which may be useful. But in these dream states, I am more able to entertain these conversations because I'm more open to them, and I am less locked into that ego state that makes it prohibits a lot of communication, at least in positive ways, from the paranormal, from non-human entities. Makes us less savory when we're in those mental states. So it seems to me that perhaps in this dream, I was being given this information to help relay to Tillie, some much needed relief that she was on the right track and that things were going to be fine, but also as sort of a signal that there was some personal growth that I had managed to achieve to that point that allowed me to be more of a part of this project that we have, and perhaps a little bit friendlier, a little bit more inviting to these non-human entities to speak to me, to interact with me. And so that's how we are now here on the Weird Walk Home doing this Intermediary Diaries to help show people, at least the goal anyway, that paranormal experiences can be positive ones, that non-human entities maybe could do without the labels of positive, negative, evil, or good, that all things are just as they are. They're simply serving a contractual purpose. And we do have the ability to change things within ourselves, which then also opens us up to these other experiences that don't have to be negative, as we would call them, or fear-based, anything of that nature, that we do have some personal control over that, and that through this inner work that we do, that so much is now out there about shadow work and doing therapy and emotional intelligence, those sorts of things, they actually serve multiple different purposes, not just for ourselves, but out in the wider world that we are all a part of and connected to. One last interesting detail that I would like to discuss is why perhaps it was Sobek that came to speak to me, or why this individual presented itself as Sobek. I don't know a whole lot about Egyptian mythology, probably like the vast majority of white American dudes, which is just, whatever you've seen in the movies, and, Anubis is cool, and you kind of know Ra, and maybe Isis because, Egyptian female goddess. Anyway, so I didn't know a whole lot. And when this entity presented itself as the crocodile god, I only vaguely knew, oh yeah, there is one. I don't know this entity's name, and I don't know in the Egyptian mythology what the representation is supposed to be for, what that god or goddess is in charge of. After the dream, and after telling Tillie, we started digging into it a little bit more, and what was really cool was, at least I found really cool, was that Sobek is known as the god of bringing order from chaos, and sort of almost like that yin and yang. Also, protection god, which a lot of the Egyptian gods and goddesses are. They share that feature. But specifically, that this god was in charge of bringing order from chaos and balancing those two forces of the universe. So the light and the dark, and, yin and yang, that sort of thing. That's kind of a common theme among many cultures in their mythology. And that is something that Tillie tries to help accomplish, bring a little bit more order from chaos, or creation from chaos for people. And not to make that as a judgment that she feels things are a mess and she needs to clean them up. Not at all. Both of those forces exist in nature, and they both need to. And so someone must be on the side of the chaos and someone must be on the side of creation and order, and they just go together very well, in my opinion. For that god to present himself that way, to deliver that particular message to Tillie, of all the other gods and goddesses that have all different types of meanings and purpose, that one was the most fitting, and one that I didn't even really know much about or existed, was plucked from, somewhere in the energy, in the field, without my conscious knowledge of it. You may enjoy that little anecdote, that little tidbit of a detail. And furthermore, to the idea about maybe gods and goddesses and characters in books and movies and television that we have created, they might be something akin to archetypes, these characters that we have that, there's nothing new under the sun, everything already exists, that when we call them forth with our attention, that it's not just our imaginations or our creativity, that these characters actually exist, and that there may not be quite such a separation between what we call, fact and fiction, that people might call the gods and goddesses just works of fiction, but they may quite be very real entities, or they could be entities that choose those characters to embody, to deliver a message, tell a story, have an interaction that they can bounce, in between all of them. So that line between real and not real, I think, is quite blurry. Something else to think about. And from what I understand, non-human entities who are very low in ego content, where they don't have much of a persona or a character of their own, find it quite easy to move from one character, one mask, one costume to another without much attachment, just to forward a story or an experience, an interaction. And they aren't necessarily attached to it. They can and do create these things like we would costumes and use them as such. So when you're interacting with what you think is maybe Jesus or an Egyptian god, in my case, it might be worth considering who it is that you are really interacting with and why that being is choosing to interact with you on that sort of a level, with that sort of presentation. So until our next story later on down the road on the Weird Walk Home, we appreciate any and all of your comments on this material down in the box below, and we'll see you next time.
It's only forever, not long ago, lost and lonely. That's underground. No love injection, nah.